Israeli Minister of Public Security says officials will investigate the actions of its police officers during the funeral of Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh.
The investigation comes after footage showed law enforcement attacking pallbearers and mourners with batons during the procession in Jerusalem on Friday. The actions of the officers have sparked international outrage. Secretary of State Antony Blinken denounced the Israeli police for their actions. Religious leaders around the world have also condemned the attack, accusing authorities of violating human rights. The Al Jazeera veteran journalist was shot in the head while covering an Israeli military raid in the West Bank last week. CBS News correspondent Ian Lee has more on the story.
Even in death, Shireen Abu Akleh couldn't find peace. Last Friday, Israeli police attacked the pallbearers carrying her coffin, beating them with clubs. Authorities say they were provoked, but Jerusalem's top Catholic leader isn't buying it.
Israel's police invasion and disproportionate use of force is a severe violation of international norms and regulations.
The attack shocked Shireen's already grieving family.
One of the Israeli forces told me, if you do not get away from here, I will beat you.
Lena had worried about her aunt's safety as a reporter, but says Shireen tried to reassure her.
We're protected by our vest, and they can see it says capital letters press.
The Al Jazeera journalist was wearing that vest when eyewitnesses say an Israeli soldier shot the Palestinian American last Wednesday. Her funeral saw one of the largest turnouts in Jerusalem in years. Shireen was already an icon, a role model for many women and girls across the Arab world. Her legacy will now live forever.
At least Shireen, the whole world is seeing her story now.
Israel says it's investigating her killing, but is not claiming responsibility.
It's important to have accountability to show that Israel cannot get away with another crime.
Do you think you'll get accountability?
We really hope so.
As a journalist, Shireen fought to tell the truth. Now her family is fighting to know what truly happened to her. Ian Lee, CBS News, Jerusalem.
Joining us now is Noura Erakat. She is a human rights attorney and associate professor at Rutgers University. Professor Erakat, thank you so much for joining us. What more can you tell us about the investigation into that violence at Abu Akleh's funeral and the investigation into her shooting?
Thank you for having me. I want to emphasize that Shireen is not only a journalist, but introduced so many generations of us into Palestine, especially those that have lived in the diaspora and through the many years of Palestinian struggle, ongoing struggle for freedom. We should emphasize that the Israeli forces that shot her shouldn't be there. They should not be on this land at all, as Palestinians have been saying now for 74 years. We should also emphasize that the uproar over Shireen and over Shireen's death is because it's very clear to those of us watching that this was a shot of precision under her helmet and into her head, and one that fits the pattern and practice of Israel's systematic targeting of Palestinians. She is not the first Palestinian, and certainly not the first Palestinian journalist to be targeted by Israel, and there in fact is no ongoing investigation to tell you about because Israel does not have an investigation.
So, Professor, it's your assertion then that the Israeli forces, the IDF, specifically targeted Shireen?
That is what we have gathered so far from eyewitnesses. It's what we gathered from Beit Salem's coordinates of where Palestinians were, where fire was coming from. And moreover, it does fit into this pattern and practice. Even if we can't determine it with certainty, it is what necessitates an impartial international investigation. What Israel is doing right now of asking for an investigation should be understood as an attempt to further whitewash its crimes. It is a PR campaign. It is not an impartial investigation into the life and death, the life and murder, I should say, of Shireen Abu Akleh. She in Beit Salem has also found that Israel's investigation of itself in the Great March of Return in the Gaza Strip, where over 200 Palestinians were killed, 90% of whom were shot in the torso, in the neck, in the back, did not yield any outcomes. We have similar data that tells us that police investigations in the West Bank, 81% of them have led to failure. We have the case of my cousin who was shot and killed at checkpoint separating two Palestinian cities whose body is still held in a freezer at Tel Aviv University for the past 2 years, where Israel has refused to investigate and refused to allow anybody else to investigate. What we have from independent organizations shows that he was shot in cold blood. So we do not trust an Israeli investigation. We do not trust judge, jury, and executioner. It would fail by any liberal due process standards, and it should be rejected outright here, as everyone should demand an international impartial investigation. And most importantly, an end to this occupation, an end to Israeli impunity, and unequivocal support of Palestinian freedom.
And so, Noura, since obviously from your perspective, you don't believe that Israel can conduct a fair investigation into this matter and the multiple other shootings that you just outlined, who do you think should be conducting an investigation? And are you calling on any international authorities to do so?
Let me be really clear. This is not merely my perspective, but this is empirical data that has demonstrated that Israel cannot investigate itself. Israeli organizations, international organizations, Palestinian organizations have demonstrated that Israel is unable and unwilling to investigate itself. We have now, I think the number is 400 Palestinians who have been killed since 2020. How many of them have been investigated? This is not just a call for an international investigation, which I think there are a number of impartial organizations that can lead this investigation to doing this. But it should not stop at merely the investigation of Shireen's murder. It should be an investigation, and we have multiple reports that have told us that Israel is overseeing a regime of apartheid over Palestinian lives, that this is a settler colonial condition that necessitates the removal of Palestinians, that the killing of Palestinians, I'm a legal scholar who studies the laws of war, even in Israel's changing in the laws of war, they have shrunk the category of who counts as a Palestinian civilian so that they can kill more and more Palestinians and say that it was legal within the language of law. So they are manipulating the law, even as they are telling us that they are abiding by the law. What Palestinians need is international intervention, the same kind of solidarity and intervention, the boycotts, the divestments, the sanctions that ended apartheid in South Africa. Palestinians need that here by all diplomatic capitals, as well as UN agencies and international human rights organizations, as well as people like you. Everybody that's watching can participate in order to overcome the diplomatic intransigence that continues to hold Palestinians in this position of unfreedom and oppression.
All right, Professor Noura Erakat, thank you very much for your perspective. We appreciate it.